Hi everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Some Drivel, a podcast exploring tangents with awesome humans. Now today, I'm very, very honored to be joined by the versatile, talented Russ Bain, who you may know most recently from Banishers Ghosts of New Eden, a fantastic RPG action experience from Focus Entertainment. Russ, thank you so much for giving up your time. I really do appreciate you jumping on with me today.
Thanks for asking me. Pleasure to
So,
talk to you.
I mean, just off the straight away, I kind of wanted to acknowledge Banishers. It's one of your most recent projects. I think narratively, in terms of the way that that story was constructed and the kind of story it wanted to tell, a really well-crafted experience. And I just wanted to sort of tip my hat to you, man, because I think you guys did a fantastic job on that. The key thing that I took away from it, the notion of a character wanting to, his role is literally to banish souls or to rescue them, right? And there's that constant push and pull of choice that you're faced with throughout the story. And thinking back over the course of your career, given the fact that you're both, you've worked in live action, you've worked on film, you've worked in video games, is there a moment actually that rather than wanting to go back and banish it and get rid of that, is there something from your career that actually you'd want to go back to, an indelible moment, something that you really identify with over the course of your work?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh, make me from it. Thinking to do here. A moment in time that I would like to go back to and enjoy it more,
it could be to take a lesson forward. It could just be, actually, you know what, please give me that experience again because it was so defining or interesting, just something that just jumps out to you over the course of the work.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I suppose like my brain anyway immediately goes to kind of regret and things I would do differently. But actually, it's quite nice to kind of push your mind to think about things that were maybe a positive experience that you. I mean, I remember doing I think it was in terms of the people I was working with and the environment, and it was really, really early on. I did a music video, and in those days, it was certainly for the one I did, it was like a big budget, and it was almost like making a little mini movie, a short film, and it was the band Muse, and they had this
nice.
And people like it's got the songs called Knights of Sidonia, and it had this great actor who's now a really good friend called Richard Brake, and it was directed by Joseph Kahn, who's obviously like is super famous and a leader in that field. And I remember just as a young actor having that experience, and I'm not saying it's never gotten any better, but I guess part of me wishes you could go back and just kind of bottle it and realize. I think at the time I realized how lucky I am. It was really exciting, and it's hard to kind of maintain that. You don't always get to work with such amazing people. You don't always get to work in such a kind of fun environment. And I guess there's a lesson for anything in life, right? When you go back and tell your younger self to enjoy it and soak it up. And I think what I learned there, certainly from like observing Joseph, the director, like the level of like discipline on set and detail and responsibility and the way that everyone around is treated and all of that. Like, yeah, it was really like, for me, it was I think my first time. I'd done like commercials. I'd been on sets, but nothing like that. And it was a lot of learning. And I've actually, we've sort of, some of us have kept in touch, and over the years, that was 18 years ago or something. But that's definitely something when I think back, I think, oh, that was an amazing experience for a young person to have, like
for sure. I mean, I suppose also it's tricky, isn't it? Because it's almost like it's the power of hindsight, where you perhaps in the moment didn't realize quite what an impact that experience would have had without being removed from it. It's very difficult sometimes to know truly what the value of something until perhaps it's long past, right? So given the fact also that, I looking across the arc of your career and the work you've done, there is a real sense of variation in there. And I know obviously, we've spoken to several actors in the past on Some Drivel where, a lot of it can be, especially in the early days, it's born out of necessity, right? There is the livelihood component of that. A job comes up, you go for it, you get it, and that keeps you pushing forward to the next. But I was curious, in terms of like taking a project like Banishers, when something like that comes along, which is clearly not your first video game either, is there something in there that was the hook for you creatively? Something that made you go, actually, I can do this. I can play Red. I can take on this character.
Yeah, it didn't. That doesn't. It certainly in this case or in my case, it didn't happen in the beginning. I didn't kind of think, oh, this is going to be a role that I can do. I'm in the position as an actor, like most actors, certainly a lot, where you're just hunting for the job, and you're not too fussy always what you're dining on. You just need the meat. And Banishers was one of those sort of things that I had no idea, as is quite often the case, as has been my experience in video games. You don't really know what the scope of work is going to be. I didn't even know when I got the job that it was the lead role. I didn't know the co-lead. I didn't. It's not like you get kind of sold the job. You're really the pauper at the feast, kind of going, give me something. And if you,
of course,
so yeah, I wasn't aware of how the scope of it. And the same thing, I did the Game of Thrones video game. Me and another guy called Alex Jordan, who's a great voice actor, and I don't know what his experience was, but mine, again, it was I got that job in America. I got called into a studio. At the end of that first session, I remember kind of going, "Is that it?" And they kind of laughed. I ended up working on it for a year and a half or something. And with Banishers, I did know pretty quickly what it would entail. But yeah, it was some point during the process. It's like maybe fairly early on, you start to kind of go, okay, this is what the character is going to be like, and it's not like maybe like a film or a TV show where you get a script and you read the script and you gravitate towards elements of the character, or you kind of think, oh, how am I going to figure that bit out? Or it's not really like that. It's more because you don't get all the scripts in advance or anything like that.
Also, it's not fully formed for you in ahead of time,
No, what we had with Banishers is we had a kind of a meeting, and I remember, I think it was during lockdown, early lockdown, maybe, can't remember, around that time. But I remember we had this sort of Zoom meeting, and I think the producer was there, the writers, the story developer. There was like lots of people on the call, and Amika, who plays Antea, and I remember coming off that call and kind of being like, I don't know what they were talking. Like they've presented this world, and I'm not naturally lent towards like fantasy,
sure,
and that kind of was. It's not. It just doesn't go into my brain that easily. So they were describing this whole story and world and everything else, and I did feel daunted and like I didn't really understand it.
It's very elaborate, isn't it, in terms of the way that so much of I think why that game is so effective is because you can set the pace of how you're consuming that narrative, because a lot of it's optional. A lot of it's those things you find in and around the world. It could be a side quest, a letter. It creates, that sense of real world building. But I can imagine as an actor having to step into that, particularly in a role like Red, where you're essentially shaping a lot of that lore and that narrative. Is there an element of that can be quite creatively daunting, in a sense?
Yeah, it could be, but I have to say in this case, I think what I find, with work is that if you've just got the pressure comes from when you have to turn up as an actor and just perform, and all you've got is the script. You haven't got a writer that sat you down and said, here was my vision, and then you've got that's like a guiding light that you can use. Where so that can create a bit of pressure, I think, and it can create doubt, because you think, well, have I got it right? Am I reading the character right? Are they gonna think I've got it wrong?
Of course, because you're thinking about like, am I going to meet the interpretation that they had when they first wrote the part?
Exactly, yeah, because it's, I mean, that's kind of like what happens when you audition, right? You just got to give your best shot, and you don't know if it's what they're looking for or not. And then when you get the job, you're like, do I just do what I did in the audition? But the thing with Banishers, it was really collaborative from the off, really creatively collaborative. I felt like the writers were really open to, I mean, I guess they had the time and the budget and whatever to allow long conversations. We had three different directors working throughout the time we did it. I think it was 2 years, or pretty much I was working on it. And yeah, there was lots of voices, but in a really positive way, so there was, it felt like there was freedom, but it felt like there was guidance when you needed it. It was very, very open. And I have to say, I loved that about it. Like the writers in particular, they were just, they weren't precious, they were open, but they were also really clear, and
had a vision for it,
Yeah, and that's what I have to say I love about I really enjoy about voice work, and particularly video games, is that it feels collaborative. You don't have that kind of right next, in TV, it's they're
Right.
just getting through the schedule
Mm.
as efficiently as they can, and that doesn't always lend itself. Can sometimes it might, but doesn't always lend itself to creative collaboration. That's for
No,
sure.
that makes sense. And actually,
Um,
especially when you side by side those experiences, typically what you'd find, going through, say, a few sides of dialogue on a TV or film set
mm,
versus, say, perhaps a dozen or so pages you've been able to shoot on a mocap stage or in the booth. It is a very different in terms of logistics. I found, for when
yeah,
I've talked to actors, especially comparing those experiences, they are quite opposing to each other. There's something you mentioned there about, was it 3 directors you said that worked on the project, sort of primarily over the course of that 2 years?
yeah. And I don't know if this is recency bias or not, but the one that did the last was a guy called Danny Baldwin, and he did the last chunk, and I feel like he was there the longest. So
Right, sure.
we like our kind of relationship developed probably more than with the other two, who
Yeah,
then went on to
nice.
do other jobs. But yeah, there was 3 directors and
Because
all.
hearing you speak to that instantly in my head, I kind of had that almost that the fear of it being a too many cooks in the kitchen kind of
Mm,
moment where like you've almost got, I mean, you mentioned it being feeling very freeing and very collaborative because they had a set vision for what they wanted to make that was flexible if you had
yeah,
ideas. Is there ever that fear perhaps that can actually end up being a bit constraining, is to have too many people
yeah.
weighing in on something?
I think it really could be in a
Right.
different situation with different people and different egos and all that stuff. I think,
Mm,
yeah, of course, it could be a real recipe for problems and conflict and whatever. But
mm.
I didn't experience any of that with Banishers. Honestly, I felt like there was such a kind of strong. I mean, I keep referencing them, like the writers were, to me. There's a Elise Galmard, who's one of the writers on it. Like, I found her to be such a kind of clear and strong voice, and she's
Nice.
like just such a talented person. And I felt like, yeah, felt always in safe hands. So yeah, there was never any.
Well, that's going to allow you to do your best work, I suppose, right? Because you've got
Yeah,
a creative safety net of people that have your back as well,
well,
which is,
totally, yeah,
yeah,
because in something like this, I found like what I really wanted to do with Red is just, yeah, not play into the kind of macho
mm,
hero kind of thing that you could. If you look at the front cover of the thing,
sure, yeah, yeah,
he's a tough warrior guy, and I really wanted to kind of. It took a bit of, I was going to say, not courage on my part, but it took a little bit of confidence to
mm,
kind of underplay him and to
yeah.
show his softness. But that really came from the director and the writers. They give you the confidence to do that,
To actually do that
because
as part of the process.
yeah,
Nice.
because it's a video game at the end of the day. So there's an instinct sometimes with certain lines and certain scenes to kind of ramp up the drama and
Sure.
know that you're gonna be, your voice is gonna be competing with you know weapon sounds and
Hmm.
soundscapes and everything else. So you kind of got this impulse sometimes to push the drama, but actually, yeah, it was nice to get a chance to do real naturalistic
Well,
voice acting.
yeah,
And
especially when you consider the subject matter as well, because a lot of it is dealing with, it's not just death. It's not as simple as that. It's grief and how
mm,
one chooses to process that. There's a certain
yeah,
inherent vulnerability to that, I suppose, as an
exactly.
actor. Is that something where, and again, obviously without delving too personally, but a lot of actors I know take that sort of very Stanislavskian emotional memory approach where they try and draw on their own experiences to portray an emotion. Is that something you've ever you know, leveraged for yourself in your own practice and creativity where you've tried to draw on memories
Yeah,
of your own experiences? Or is it healthy is the wrong word, but is it better, safer for you to have a sort of clear delineation? This is character, this is me.
yeah, it's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I think. I mean, this is when I end up feeling like a fraud as an actor, because I go, hang on a minute, what is the process? What is the
Yeah,
thing? And
sure. Yeah.
I mean, I
There's not
don't
like a
know. It's
correct
a
answer, I suppose, is there, with something
no,
like this?
no, no, and I think it varies. I mean, I
Mm,
just last year I did a TV show for a number of months, and at the end, the last part of it, my character kind of really falls apart. There's a lot of crying,
right.
and I remember kind of thinking like, okay, how do you sell that? Because prior to that, he'd been stoic and tough and I suppose I did just use upsetting thoughts. I take my mind to dark places, partly emotional memory and partly sort of just imagining horrific things, and that can generate. And actually, I mean, it sounds really dark to say this, but since having kids, I found it doesn't take much for me to I think about something awful, and it can provoke
I
tears.
completely agree. I've often resisted the urge with I'm a teacher by trade. That's sort of something I work on day to day, and I very much in a drama studio, particularly with sort of like GCSE aged kids, I try to avoid performing too much for them, because I always think in a secondary school context, a drama teacher sort of getting up on stage and going, "Look at me act," I think is a bit like sort of, look at me, I have a degree, like it's a bit like I think it can sometimes come off as a bit self-serving, right? Equally, I think there sometimes is value in modeling an approach and saying, well, this is one way you can attack it. And interesting you say about having children. I know that since I've had my daughter, I found myself very able to access extremes, whether it's anger, upset, jealousy or something like that, negative emotions, because of of protectiveness of what I'm kind of associating with her. And I suppose that's where, did you ever find, particularly in the work you were doing, that you had to take a minute, that there had to be that decompress, or was it actually okay? Was it easier for you to have that switch and just scene is done?
I think what's tricky, and maybe the other actors have different process. I think it's like refining it so that it works. I think the danger is that you think, I know, I'm going to, turn on this tap and sort of let it go. But you have to, even though, so you're kind of, as an actor, you sort of feel like, okay, I'm using what I've got. This is good. I'm using my raw materials. But it has to match the scene, and it has to match
right.
You have to honor the other actor and the scene. So yeah, I find that like I don't know, I'm not perfect at it or anything, but it's like I suppose it depends job to job and situation to situation. I don't think there's any one answer.
No, I agree. I think you're right. I think it's context dependent, the kind of scene partner you're playing off against as well. I think often that can impact your approach, the kind of what your tennis matched back from someone, you're going to be responsive or not, depending on what you get. We were really lucky. We had a chance to speak to the actor Troy Baker a couple of years ago, and he talked about that scene in The Last of Us where his daughter's been shot and she's dying, and he originally went into it sort of going almost manufacturing the emotion a little bit and kind of saying, well, he wanted everyone to go, look at me, what an actor, look how incredible I am. But actually, there was the quote from the Grounded documentary where he says, the scene works not because of me, but in spite of me. You play your part in it, but ultimately it's serving the story. That's the most important thing. And again, I look at the work you did, obviously, with Red opposite Antia, doing, the game fundamentally is about that relationship. Serving that relationship is the story, and that is the challenge. Have you ever faced, not exactly in this case, because you can clearly see the chemistry and the comfort is there between the two of you. Have you faced, without naming anyone, but have you faced moments professionally where you kind of felt yourself going, I kind of feel like I'm doing the heavy lifting here, or I feel like I'm not getting back perhaps what I'd like?
Yeah, but I think that I probably have had that experience, but I think that would probably be definitely a kind of ego thing.
Sure.
And I don't know how much truth there would be to that. I think there's probably, sometimes you have, especially as the kind of actor I've been, where it's like been bit, it's not, I've not been an actor that's been blessed with working every day of my life, far from it. So sometimes you get these opportunities and you really want it to count. You want it to,
sure, yeah.
It's got to mean something. And then you start wanting more juice from the squeeze, and actually, it's not really about you. So like what what your man said there is, the scene works in spite of me. That's true, isn't it? And but yeah, I've had moments where, and I think most actors probably, if they're honest, have had plenty of moments where the ego has overrun them, and I see it in other. I've worked with other people. I've seen it. They've wanted. I did a film 2 years ago, in Ireland, and I remember I had very little to do. I was in it a bit, but I had like 2 proper scenes, and one of them I was like really looking forward to, and there's plenty mileage in it. And the other guy came on, and he was one of the stars of the film, and he just changed it all. He just sort of said to the director, right, I'm not doing that, I'm not doing that. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And the entire thing meant that the camera turnaround was just all about him. You know, that was him. And I remember sort of that feeling of like, oh man, like I wanted it to be more about me, you know.
Sure, yeah, but not in necessarily. I think it's almost like a good selfish, isn't it? It's not inherently a negative thing for you to recognize an opportunity to contribute to a story,
Yeah,
and if that's then to service perhaps an other ego, someone else's intention, if that then is taken away, I can understand how that could be potentially little bit like probably a little bit deflating in a sense. It can be quite,
yeah. I think as you get, I mean, you know, definitely I was younger. I think I'd have kind of marinated in that a bit more and kind of thought, but you know, now it's it doesn't, that kind of stuff doesn't really bother me. I think maybe it would if it was like my own project or something. But
sure,
the guy, I have a friend who, you know, who talked to me. He's been a bit of a mentor figure as an actor. Richard Brake, who I met him on the Muse thing, and he's given me some good advice over the years. And one of the things I remember him talking about was just being in service to the project, the production. So and that it was a good approach to, like, you know, to kind of walk onto set and just think, okay, I'm just here to serve what they're doing. I'm not here to have my moment. And you know, if you go in with that approach, I think it's helpful. Because
yeah, I agree. And actually,
otherwise, you're setting yourself up for disappointment as an actor if you think it's going to be about you.
Disappointment and also an inflated ego as well. Like that then comes with that. I suppose when you look at as well the variation of the work you've done, you know, like you said, there's been opportunities that have come up that you've wanted to attack, regardless of scene content or how much you might be appearing in it. It is, I think, you can look across everything you've done and just see the variation that you've been able to experience. I think if I was in your position, might struggle to find my compass a little bit there, because I'm bouncing potentially from thematically one scene to the next. And is there something, therefore, that you always look for? Something in a script, in a character that you go, well, there's my anchor point. There's the thing where I know, well, I know that my approach here can work here. It can work on this TV guest spot. It can work in this video game. Is there something indelibly that you kind of always try and connect with?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's things that I'll gravitate towards because I know I can do it with my eyes shut. Confidence,
Nice.
you know,
Okay.
there's things I kind of go, oh, that's my wheelhouse, but it doesn't necessarily excite me.
Right. Because is that because it is inherent and you can go, well, I know I can do this without,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
because deep down, I mean, I like, in terms of performing and acting and all that, I didn't grow up in a theatrical world or background or anything like that. My initial foray into to performing was really just doing voices and
Right.
characters and like funny stuff. And so there's a part of me that like just wants to do that. But I tend not to get those opportunities. I just sort of, you know, you look how you look. And so quite often I'll get, like, was it last week, a couple of weeks ago, I auditioned for, they're making a show called Criminal, which is like a comic book adaptation thing. And yeah, I auditioned for that. And it was, you know, a guy with a bit of a past, a bit of grit, bit of anger, a bit of, you know, and I really enjoyed it. It was great. Like, I enjoyed reading everything. I was like, oh, I could totally do that, you know. So there's a part of me when I have that, I'm like, so I could get that job because I could totally do that. So let's go for it, and I hope I get the job.
Sure.
But sometimes if I get, it's very rare, but I've had one or two, you know, where it's like a, you know, comedy audition or something, and I'm like, oh, that kind of excites me more. That's like, that
That's
gets
out of the
my,
comfort zone, or yeah.
yeah, it just gets my juices flowing. It gives me like something, you know. And again, that's why I do like voice work, because I feel like there's opportunity to yeah, you can just fling out stuff, try stuff, and
Sure.
you know, play weird. There's chances to play weird characters, like
Yeah.
non-human characters and weird things that people have come up with, and that's cool. That's really fun. I did this thing called Brawl Stars. You know that it's like a mobile game, Brawl
Oh yeah.
Stars,
Yeah.
and you know, I played like a dustbin or something, and the guy was like,
Yeah.
yeah, just be like he was an American guy, the director. He was like, just be like a Scottish dustbin, just whatever you want.
Brilliant.
And then
Yeah. Just access that straight
yeah,
away.
and I was like, great. That's like, but that just took that playful inner child part of me like came alive, because I'm like, oh great, I'll play a Scottish dustbin. That's exciting. But then you get an audition and it's like, 40-something guy with a past, bit angry, whatever. I'm like, okay, I can do
Great.
that. But
Let's just sign me up. It's interesting though, because that Scottish Dustbin, first of all, sounds like a great name for a band. But also, I feel like there's something you put on, like, like you always put on like acting, like spotlight profiles or things where it's like additional skills, and people put like, I can canoe. Yeah, no worries, I've got that down. Scottish Dustbin's got to go on there somewhere. That's fantastic. By the way, thank you for giving me the subtitle for this episode. I really appreciate that. Good. So that's a box tick. So looking again at your work on Banishers, and I think it's been really interesting, Russ, to hear you talk about your process to that, and the kind of projects you gravitate to, but also the things that tend to be your anchor points that you work on as you're creating a character. I do think so much of the success of that game is the central relationship. It's Red and Antia. And I was curious then, because chemistry is always something that's fascinated me, especially in performance. It's not something you can manufacture. People do manufacture it out of necessity, but typically audiences can see right through that. They know it's clearly not, a genuine relationship. How quickly do you think that clicked into place for you?
Yeah, firstly, I agree with you. I always find that really interesting chemistry thing. I remember watching that. I think it was the film Drive. Is that the film with Ryan Gosling and
yes,
I don't know who the woman is, but I remember watching it, and it's probably like, was it 10 years ago, whenever it was. But I remember like watching it and just being really. I was like, man, they were like really magnetic to watch.
Totally.
And the film, I can't remember much about the film really, but it was superfluous because actually, like, just their chemistry is interesting, and then when you don't see it. But anyway, well, funny enough, I mean, I really enjoyed the times when we got to record together, but actually I'd say, trying to think, maybe 75% of the time we didn't record together.
That really surprises me, because that doesn't come across at all.
No, it doesn't, but maybe I got that slightly wrong, but I'd say definitely the majority of the time we weren't recording together. But then when we did, I feel like it worked really well. And in an ideal world, we'd have had a lot more of that. It's just quite tricky with schedules and so on, particularly with Emeka. But I would have loved to have done more, and I have done that over the years, where you're in the room and it just feels more like acting. But that said, it's also quite a fun challenge, because there's a lot of my lines. A lot of it where you're just reacting off of nothing. You're just reacting to, because you're not even. It's not like the other person's pre-recorded their line.
You're essentially just doing your side, right? And there's no sort of like back and forth. Was any of it motion captured, or was it just in the booth?
For me, it was all in the booth. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. I would like to have done the other stuff, but just all in the booth.
I suppose so much of this is necessitated by like logistics, isn't it? The idea of whether it's able to match up schedules and get the actors in the room, or whether it's a case of no, actually we don't have the time to dedicate, say, an open recording session on a mocap stage. It's about getting this dialogue in the can and getting it done. I imagine with a script like that, a lot of material to have to work through. Would that be fair to say, just in terms of quantity of material that you're putting out? Do you have, is there any like requirement with anything like that where you have to have, memorize any of the lore or backstory using the dialogue itself, or is it able to be almost line by line? This is up next.
No, you definitely don't have to remember any of the dialogue, but the backstory stuff, like I said at the beginning, like I don't know what it is, but my brain just doesn't absorb like fantasy narrative and that genre. It just doesn't go in very easily. I don't know why, but so I actually find that quite difficult. And sometimes, I'd notice Emeka would be asking questions for clarification, and I wouldn't even know the right question to ask. I'm going to embarrass myself here if I'm having to ask, about where we are and the story and that kind of stuff. But they did a lot of explanation.
Oh, that's good. So you did feel at least like that content wasn't obscured. It was there. It was just tough to access because it's so dense, I imagine.
Yeah, I would just forget sometimes. But and then would be embarrassed to ask, because I know that they'd kind of gone over it. It just hadn't clicked into my brain. But on Banishers, they had so much time. Like sometimes in we'd do a bit of recording. We'd do it to most of it. We didn't have animation to watch, but sometimes we'd have, I forgot what it's called, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But we'd watch the animation first.
Or you'd see like a mock-up of the scene,
like
a wireframe or something like.
Yeah, or they had these. They looked like crash test dummies. These kind of just like model, put in place placeholders. But
that would be visualized, would it? You could actually see roughly what how it would be blocked and the camera view and everything.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So they would, I forgot the name for it, but it's escaping me. But anyway, so they'd show us that, and sometimes the words would be, on a sort of ticker tape along the bottom of the screen, and they'd want to try and match it for time and stuff like that. But most of it wasn't that. Most of it was just recording the lines, into the ether kind of thing. You're not matching anything, but there was a variety. But like I say, they give you so much time that you can kind of. So it might sound, the finished product sounds good, but there'd be a hell of a lot on the cutting room floor that would have been crap because it's just. They're going, oh, try one like this, try one like that, try one like, and there's time to play with it. So we might have tried.
Mess around with the end result. That's kind of almost a good.
So it's not like you have to nail it every time, but it might sound like, wow, you really nailed it, but actually.
But could we? Yeah, but that what a great problem to have is that you actually afforded the opportunity not only to try new stuff, but then it gives them, whether it's through editing or perhaps going back and reshooting something, the chance to really hone down the best version of that. Yeah. That's quite a nice opportunity that perhaps, say, the speed of a TV or film production wouldn't perhaps afford you necessarily. Yeah, because it's like we've got to hit. Russ, thank you so much for taking up the time to talk to us today. Really do appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for this latest episode of Some Drivel. You can find us on all of the various social things at Burly Bird Media. You can find us also on Spotify, Podbean, and YouTube, and we'll be back every single month with a brand new episode and a brand new guest. Russ, thank you again for giving up your time, and we'll see you all in the next episode.
Thanks a lot.